Good morning, everybody. As you're aware, there was a Sites Intacct features update last weekend, and the purpose for this webinar is to focus on some of these new features. So with me today as well, we have Alex from Sage that's going to share a few thoughts with us as well. Hi, Alex. And Hugo Barnos, is our solution architect for Intacct here at Market Channel, and he's going to pretty much showcase some of the features for us. So maybe just showcasing what we're going to go through today. Alex going to take us through the release update schedule from a Sage perspective. We're going to just have a broad overview of all the features, actually quite a number of features that's been updated with R3. And Hugo will focus specifically a bit on the Australian features as well. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Alex to take us from here. Thanks, Alex.
No, thank you, Stefan. Look, I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I really just wanted to make sure that you all got visibility over a mail that Microchannel sent out about a month ago now. So obviously you'll all be across that we have our quarterly updates, which we're here to discuss today. But something I want to make sure that you're all aware of is that we also have a weekly maintenance schedule that happens every Saturday between 12:30 and 4:30 p.m. And really the purpose for that window is that it allows us to basically roll out, any out of cycle updates that we need to, just to ensure that we're providing you guys with as premium of a service as possible. So look, if you've got any business critical activities, we would ask that you obviously plan around that window on a Saturday, just to ensure that there's no disruption in that regard. And that's really all I wanted to go through today. So I'm going to hand across to Hugo, and Hugo's going to take us through all things R3. So over to you, man.
Cheers. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, good day, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So I'll be going over a number of the updates that we've sort of come across for the new release. Now, I think some of you might have seen that there are some indications within Sage Intacct already that you can see those releases. So by all means, please click through, go look at the release videos. On each of these releases, there would be release videos as well that you can view in your own time as well. I'll take you through a bit of an overview, show you some of the highlights that we've seen come through, and then also go into some of the details for Australia specific, just to showcase those to you as well. It won't take too much of your time, so yeah, just the idea of getting you familiar with what we have and what has been released. Basically, we've sort of brought or divided this into three sections. So the first section we'll look at is the best-in-class financials update. So there's two sections in there. There's core accounting and the tax update. So there's been a few updates that came within this release 3. And obviously, as you can see, there will be some more coming out in R4. So each year we've got the quarterly updates. I think most of you are aware of that now. And there's always the release notes that come with them as well. So just a number of these. There's a few that I'll go into some more detail on when we go through. But there are some. I'll just highlight a few that I won't go into detail from. But from an AP payment proposal or payment approval process, you can do that from the top level. There's some vendor remittance emails that's been updated and the method of sending that out automatically and what's included with that. And then on the AR side, there's a bit of credits and bulk select possibilities that's now available as well. Like I said, if you open up AR, for instance, within that section, you'll get some details on what has been changed, and you can go through that specific release note, and some of them does have a video as well that you can watch. From a tax perspective, there's been a few updates. I think one of the biggest additions was the Canadian side. So if your organization does have a Canadian entity, the Canadian tax is now part of the system as well. But there are also some setup updates regarding the UK, Australia, and South Africa, just from a setup point of view. And we've also got now within Australia the partial exemption that you can activate, and I'll show you a bit of that as well later on. From the tax perspective, there's also been some changes just on the distribution side regarding order entry and purchase orders, mainly how that gets activated on the screen, and then especially on the transaction copy. So if you convert or copy a sales or a purchase order, those details are now coming through as well. So a bit of enhancements on that side, just making that process a bit smoother for you while processing as well. The next section is just on the cross-industry functionality. Now, there's a number of areas that were touched on, and just some of the highlights there. If you use contracts, I'll show you a few of those updates coming in, and that's now available. From a Salesforce integration, you can see there's some new field mappings available, some improvements around the project sync, and we can also sync the draft contracts through as well. So a number of things there. On the distribution side, again, from an inventory point of view, there is the warehouse transfers, but what we've added now is the in-transit location. So if you send stock across, it is not available immediately. Obviously, it goes into in-transit, so you've got better visibility and tracking of that stock now going forward. Also, the ability to now stock the parents, the kit parents, so you can actually stock the kitted items. So if you use kitting from an inventory perspective, it's now available to stock, and you can do a bit of the expanded item tracking is now available as well. From the project point of view, you can see there on the purchase order document header, the project is now available. So it just makes it a bit easier to capture those details in and get the references back to the specific projects that you're working on. And then if you're in construction, there's some updates on the construction side. They haven't spent much time on that one. I don't think we've got anyone in the construction industry at this point on this call. From our best-in-class cloud platform, there's a number of things that's enhanced there. The employee sync with the Sage people, so just making that employee file a lot more comprehensive within Intacct as well, getting the skills through, getting all the relevant information through that you can now use within Intacct as well. And then some improvements on the reporting side as well. So dashboard improvements, financial report writing usability. And then, across the regions, there's some date formats and a bit more improvement on the time, project time and in reports as well. So a number of features to look out for on that section. And again, I'll take you through a bit of the reporting side and the dashboards just to sort of touch on what has gone through there as well. From a platform point of view, there is an option to do secure PDFs, and I've got that in the detailed section, so I'll show that to you. And then the data delivery DDS optimization, so a couple of optimizations coming out there that allows that extraction of data just to make that easier as well and get that out as required. So the highlights that we'll go through today, I'll look a bit about going into the outlier detection. We'll look at the matching rules. So with the bank feeds, there's been some updates, and I'll take you through what has been changed and what is still to come. I mentioned there's a bit of the contracts model that's updated, so I'll show you a few things that's come through on that one. And then just on the dashboards and the report writer, we'll go into a bit more detail there as well to show you the number of things that came out there. Okay. So the first part of this, just to go through it, would be the outlier detection. Now, the outlier detection basically leverages machine learning to flag the items that require a closer look, and this is during the GL approval process. So that's been around and it's been available, but the enhancements at this stage in this release basically improved the UI to give you at a glance visual that basically shows you why something was flagged. So there's a number of things or a number of reasons why it's flagged, but basically if there's a coding error or a coding anomaly, the amount is out of the normal, and then also if there's multiple transactions, with the same detail in there. So that's basically from an outlier perspective. Remember that's machine learning. So the system will start learning these processes and start identifying these for you. And you do have the ability now to actually optimize this as well. So you've got the option to actually set that threshold. So you can see at this stage, the threshold sitting there at $25. So we can increase that or decrease that. If it falls within that threshold, obviously it's not an outlier, it's acceptable. But as soon as it falls outside of that threshold, then you start seeing those identified, and you can work through the approval process and make sure that we see and have sort of a visual of those as well. From a dimension point of view, you can also set dimension priority. So basically looking at which dimensions do you prioritize within the outlier setup. So those are the number of things that can now be added on or fine-tuned basically to enhance the GL outlier detection process. When we look at the next section, this is basically on the bank feeds. Now, there's a couple of things that sort of changed here. Now, obviously, the bank feeds, the idea behind it is to reduce the reconciliation time and effort to try and automate the matching process from the bank transactions and the Intacct transactions. So that's the ultimate goal of this. So obviously, they start improving and keep improving on this process. The more requirements build and request comes in. So the couple of main features that I want to highlight there, we've basically expanded the criteria operators. So on the text and date fields, we can now have extended, it's not just the equals that we have in there. So I'll show you a couple of those as well in a second. But it allows you to basically filter a bit better and get those rules in place. Now, the other option is more on the grouping side of things. So we've added additional grouping options. So you can basically group on document number and or the posting date. And that's to assist and automate the process where you have that one-to-many, the many-to-one, or even the many-to-many relationship between Intacct and the bank statement effectively. So once we set that up, you can start grouping those individual transactions together based on either the document number, the document date, or both of them, and match that to many on the other side or many on either side effectively. So the grouping capabilities has been expanded as well. And then the other section that they improved on is the rule set itself. So remember, we basically build a number of rules within Intacct And then once we've built those rules, we add them into a rule set, and that's basically the sequence in which those rules are executed. Now, in the new release, you've got the option to change that sort order. So you basically put down and prioritize the rules that are more precise. And then afterwards, you get the other more generalized rules that you can then incorporate in as well. So what I'll do is I'll just show you a number of these within the product itself. So when we look at that within cash management, there is on the setup side, I'll look at the rules first. And when we look at the rules, there's just some of the examples that we can have in there. So if you look at a simple document amount and date matching options, you can see we basically just match the posting date is equal to the posting date from the bank to the Intacct side, or the amount equals the amount, the same with the number. Also have the option to say it's a document number, but the leading zeros have been removed. Now, as I mentioned, there are some operators that have been changed. So we do now have the ability to use the contains, for instance, in these sections, or from a date perspective, we also have the option to say within a number of days. So if you process a bank transaction from your system, from Intacct, and the bank takes a couple of days to release it, for instance, so we can do the matching within the number of days of the specific date from the bank statement entry. So it gives you a bit more flexibility to set up these rules and then start utilizing them as well. When you look at the filtering, if we look at specific fields here, for instance, you can see that the operators there has also been extended. So you've got the ability to then get the exact transaction. So when you get those specific rules, we want transactions with a document number, or the document description that contains bank fees, for instance. We always want to get them out first. You can start separating those out as well. So that's some of the improvements that's came in. And just on a little teaser out there, obviously, as well. So going in R4, at this stage, we only have matching rules within the rule set, but going forward, we'll also have some transactional rules. So, using this bank fees as an example, we can then start creating those transactions automatically based on these rules that we've got as well. So excitement for the next release as well. But again, on this release, the automation of the rules to try and extend the functionality, extend the operators that we've got available to set up these rules. The one other thing that I just want to quickly touch on this side is just on the rule set. So if we look at this rule set, we now have the ability to change the sort order. So if you've got multiple rules set going down, you can physically drag this across and say, yep, I want the many-to-one rule to happen first. Or then say, you know what, I need this precise rule to happen first. We want all the exact matches to be matched automatically first. Then look at the many-to-one rule. Then look at any additional rules that we might engage at that point as well. So just a bit of flexibility on how we incorporate these rules and how we call the rules within the rule set as well. I saw that, but I'll show that to you. So when we looked at the other rules, there's also the option. So there's the grouping transactions, so the Intacct transactions and the bank transactions, where we can say on which fields we want to group. So like we mentioned, the document number and the posting date, so we can group this on either side and then use that in the reconciliation process. Okay. So that's basically the enhancements on the bank feeds. And like I said, release 4, there's always some improvements, and we know about some expected releases that will come through in that one as well. When we look at the next section that I want to just touch on, quite excited about this one, inter-entity bullback. So at this stage, we have the ability to do normal inter-entity transactions. So from a GL perspective, we've got your intercompany journals that you can do from AP and AR. You can do invoices across companies on both sides. But in this case, we can actually start billing back. So you've got different entities. We charge from one entity, and the other entity needs to pay that. You can now do that from the AR module. So just to sort of reiterate this, it is I want to almost call it a one-way traffic. So we do need to start this from an accounts receivable point of view, and that will then generate the accounts payable invoice for you. So there's a number of setups to be done on this as well, and I'll show you that quickly as well. But there's a couple of things just to highlight. You can record this transaction there in 3 possible currencies, so that's always good to have the visibility of all the different multi-currency that's available there. And then we add the specific tax solution before we posting it to the GL. We expect that one in there, and we can also post directly to the inter-entity account. So if you need to post directly to it, you do have that ability. But from a transaction point of view, how do we sort of get this going? When we go back into Intacct, the important one to note first, one of this is, yes, we need to activate that. So from accounts receivable, yes, you can go through your normal subscriptions as well, but through the accounts receivable configuration, one of the options to activate there would be enable the inter-entity bullback. And then for most of us, because we do have GST or tax enabled, it will be created as a draft document. But that's, again, in my opinion, that's probably the better solution, to have that as draft. You can view that invoice before it gets finalized. And if there's any approval, on your accounts payable side, that can kick in at that stage as well, and you can approve that document going forward as well. So that's the first step. We need to enable that inter-entity bullback if you want to use that functionality. The other option is not obviously, but we need to enable on the entities which customers and suppliers to use when we start using it. So from your entity perspective, if you look at your setup on the entities, for each of the entities, you can, on the additional information tab, now have a look at and link the supplier and the customer related to the entity that you're working in. So that's obviously required for each of the entities that you want to use in this process. So get that set up first. Make sure we activate on AR, get this set up, and then we can start transacting and start billing back as well. So just a quick one. I'll take you through the process of creating that transaction. So I'll go into accounts receivable. I'll start a new invoice. So I'll add, and just to go back on that one before I go in there. As mentioned, you can see that there is some new releases there and efficiency. So from the drop down, there's all the release notes, watch release highlights. So there's a number of videos that you can watch there as well. But yeah, on this one, from an inter-entity perspective, we select the customer. So who do we want to bill? We want to physically bill, entity 100, for instance. So we select that customer that we set up as the entity customer, and we can put that in. You always have that option. I think that's a standard one as well, populate from last invoice. So if you've done this before, you can populate that. So a lot of the information can come through. But the new functionality that came in is generate the matching AP purchase invoice. So that's the new part that comes in. And we can set up a template as well to make this process a bit easier. So what needs to be populated when we do this one? The easy part on my side, I'm just going to put the transaction amount in and the location. So I'm invoicing from my one entity to my other. So I'm in entity 200, I'm invoicing entity 100 in my case. So I'll just post that document, and that's gone through, so that's posted. So that's a normal accounts receivable invoice that you process. We get the transaction in, we get the details listed, and then from a system point of view, obviously the GL entry gets created. But in addition to that, we get our accounts payable invoice. So if we scroll down to accounts payable, we look at our AP purchase invoices. We can see in draft mode on today's date, there's our new invoice. So it brings through the same accounts receivable document number that we processed as our AP invoice number. So everything is the way it is. And if we edit that, you can see basically that's exactly. So that's our supplier, entity 200. There's a professional fees account that we use based on our template, and the amount and the location that we're in with the department. So depending on all your dimensions that you specify on the AR invoice, it'll come through to the AP side as well with the relevant information. So once you're comfortable with that, you can effectively just submit that as well, and it's posted if you don't have workflows on. But if you've got approval, it'll go through that approval process, and that can be approved as well. So a nice feature that I really was hoping for. It's one of those that everyone asks for, but eventually it is in there. Okay. So that was the inter-entity bullbacks. From a contracts point of view, so like I mentioned, there's a bit of enhancements there. So subscription-based businesses, this will basically give you more flexibility around the billing, and it also gives you a bit more insight around the contracts. Now, it's basically the commitment or the committed quantity consumption is a new feature that was added. So that basically streamlines the billing based on the customer's consumption of contracted quantities. So you can see on the left screen here, when we set up the billing, it can now be quantity based. So that's the billing method, and we use the committed quantities. So you can physically say, what was committed, and then run the billing off of that process. From the flexible invoice generation, we've got a simple, we can select the invoice by. So how do we want to invoice these customers? It'll always be by the customer because that's required, but we can now have new aggregates, how we can aggregate this. It could be by a specific bill to detail, a specific contract or a specific project within the contracts module. So based on that, we can aggregate all the billing information and send the customer the bill based on what we've aggregated on the new features in there as well. So there's a number of new interactive customer report that's been pre-built. If you're using the contracts model, that's available out of the box, so you can start using that. If there's something in addition to that, it might just be a very nice starting point for you to then take and enhance those reports and get the reports that's required in there. But you can see there's quite a few that came out that gives you that flexibility and the visibility of what happened in the organization around the billing and the contracts as well. When we look at the dashboards, there's a few new enhancements that came out. So a few new components that were added on there as well. So there's a billboard component. So basically, any new announcements you can send out across the organization. The attachment container. So if you've got any, let's call it policies or procedures, for instance, that you want to handle or get across, a business process that you want to enforce, any new starters, you activate this, get that document uploaded, and then have that available for the new starter. They can read those policies, the procedural document, and have visibility of what needs to happen. So it's a quick way of sharing information using Intacct as well, having that collaboration available and having it on screen as well. Also, by popular demand, basically, from a customer request, we do have the option to have fast access or custom navigation areas that can be added. So instead of having each user create their own favorite menu, we can create a dashboard, set up some specific custom navigation or fast access icons in there, and the user does have the ability to then start utilizing that. So when they log in, they've got access to the dashboard and they can just start using it and using those new links in there as well. So when looking at the system-wide, how do we do those? So if we look at a dashboard, for instance, I'll just load up one of the previous dashboards. So there's policies and procedures. So you can see, we can physically set this up, add new ones in there. I've also added report shortcuts. So you can see there, if you've got your report section, you can add that in there. Just have a shortcut to all the reports that you've got access to as a quick dashboard. That makes life a bit easier. But adding the new ones on a normal dashboard, just remember, it's basically adding a component on the little plus sign there on the right, and then on the little pop-up that comes up, always component type general. So that's what we're looking at now. Obviously, some of the others are more collaboration, smart links, and reports that we want to do. From a component point of view, what do we want to add? So attachment container, there's the attachment container, so we can bring that in. As soon as we create a new one, you can start adding attachments in there. Existing containers, you can also add new attachments in there. If there's a policy update, add the new document to that attachment ID, and then that's available in there as well. Like we said, we can add the billboard in there. So if there's any communication or announcement that needs to be made, that can come through there. All the standard features still available, calendar, close through, and then the custom navigation. So if you look at custom navigation, you can give it a title. So it's fast access that we had on the previous one in there. And on the link details, we can say, journal entry, for instance. And then on the menu side, I'll just increase the size of it. You should be able to go down, select journal entry, and then if you add additional ones, you can add additional ones in there. Otherwise, if you save that, it'll take that new component, create that as a component effectively, and have that available on your dashboard. So you can see there's my fast access that I created, and there's my journal entry. So if we have that available, you can just open that up. It opens up the journal entries, and you can add new ones or start looking at those journals. So it just makes the navigation a bit easier. You don't have to go through the menus. And again, for new users, onboarding new users, that's always a quick way of getting them on board, getting them familiar with the system, where they need to go to process specific transactions, for instance, as well. The other one is the company board. So if there's a message that you need to come through, add that on there. It's quick and easy. You get that available across the organization. And as long as we've got that on the dashboard itself, so if we had a quick message board, if we bring that message board as part of a dashboard that we give to all the users, we can then have whoever's got access to that message board update their messages, and you can see as soon as I add that message board, any relevant messages that's still valid and effective can then be displayed on this message board as well. So you can be sure that everyone's got visibility of those. Okay, so that's basically some of the nice advancements that I identified just from a dashboard point of view, and what can be added on this side as well. The next bit that I just want to quickly touch on is more on the financial report writing. So there's a couple of things that they've added in here. So the first part is there's a new divider column type that's been introduced. Obviously, that's quite an important one in certain areas. It's just for better readability. So if you look at this one, you can see normally all the columns would just be next to each other, but once we start adding those dividers in there, at least there's a bit of space, so it makes that document just a bit more readable and available for the users to start using. So that's the first part. The next one, we look at a new forecast for the full period column type. So when you start looking at that, and there's an example that I'll show you shortly, where we can have a full forecast that show as well. Basically, so it uses the full budget instead of a prorated budget for the current period. Okay, so we've got the actuals for the number of months prior, and instead of using the year to date or the prorated budget, we can use the full forecast and have it available, and then the budgets for the rest of the rest of the periods that's available. So quite useful in there. And then we've also expanded on the normalized column types. Now, just on the normalized column types, and these are the ones that you can see on this side. So you can see the period variance, normalized, period difference, normalized, and the actual versus budget difference. Those are all normalized columns. Now, normalized, what does that mean? It's basically, it's an interpretation of the variances as positive or negatives. So if you look at a revenue that exceeds the budget, they'll be displayed as a positive or a good indicator, whereas if you look at expenses that exceeds the budget, that's displayed as a negative. So normalized is basically just to make that readability or use that interpretation of that variance and get that more visible on the report that you're showcasing as well. Now, the other part that we've done in there as well is when you add new columns to a financial report, the system will basically use the default reporting books that you've configured for your GL, but you do have the ability now to always change this. So you can now start adding additional books onto the reports, and I'll show that to you as well. But just on some of these, so you can see these are all actuals going through, and then there's the full period forecast, and then budgets for the remaining. So instead of using that prorated budget showing there, we can use the full forecast column now coming through. Just the addition of that plus and minus, so that's the normalized columns that we sort of spoke about, and those are the ones to just make sure that we know how to interpret those variants that we'll show. And then that reporting book that I showed you, what I'll do, I'll just quickly jump in to show you this one. So when we look at the reports and we create a new financial report, I won't go through the whole process. So I'll just do a new report in this case, base it on dimensions, and I'll use my location at this point. When we look at the columns that gets added, generally this column for the actuals would have your normal accrual book that's available. So by default, that's what's set up. You do have the ability to now edit that and say, you know what, I want my eliminations books in there, I want my allocation books in there, any commitments you want to get in there. So you do have the ability to bring that through as well. And even if you add additional columns in there, you do have the ability to say on those columns, instead of just having other ones in there, I don't want to include the main reporting book. So if we just want to look at our allocations, this column in that book, we don't have our normal accrual book, we just have the allocation book. So depending on what you want to see on that report, you've got the ability to basically change that and have that visible going forward. The next section, probably not as relevant here, but they've basically added the ability to secure your PDF document generation. So when you're uploading new document templates, you now have the option to indicate if that PDF document should be generated with secure PDF settings or not. And that will basically just help protect the generated documents such as your custom invoices. Like I said, it's not relevant or too relevant yet, but this is in the South African legislation, that's a requirement. So that's why it's introduced, but it's still in my opinion, a good release in there. So it is useful. So from a security point of view, you can say what can happen to those PDF documents if it's generated from within Intacct. So we can set up a template, and then what is the security? So printing is allowed, but any of the other documents is not allowed. So it's just to secure that and make sure there's no tampering with these documents at all. There's the support for the reduced input for tax credits is now available. So from an Australian point of view, some entities require for reduced input tax. So this is basically activated from an entity level. So you can see on the screen, and I'll quickly show you on Intacct as well. So if you go into the actual entity, now bear in mind this is for Australia. So on the other entities, it's not available. So for your Australian entity, you do have the ability to then go down, and the reduced input tax credit would now be available. Okay, so you can activate that. You do have the option to default that in as well. So default reduced input tax, and then put in an effective date and the percentage of the value that you do. So when you look at that, basically, yes, that's the setup that I showed you there. But when you look at the AP invoice, you can see, you've got that RITC option available there, where you can say, which input tax you want to use. Do you want to use the default tax detail or tax rate that's selected, or do you want to use the reduced input tax credit that we've got available? And again, if we use that default selected on, then this tick will be defaulted on, and it'll always be selected. So there's a number of features, and just to sort of reiterate, there's just the overview again on what has been released. Have a look at that. If there's anything that sort of jumps up and realize that's something that you need to start using, like I said, you can refer back to this. You can refer back to some of the release notes available, some of the release videos that's there. that you can basically jump on to make sure that you across of what is required to get that going. Obviously, if you need assistance, let us know. We can always assist with that as well.